What's up? So I'm getting ready to start. Uh, I've been planning on it for a while. Redoing my wall build in my Tahoe, and this whole discussion, so you guys know ahead of time, is going to be about walls, not sub enclosures in the vehicle, but like an actual wall. So if that's what you're thinking in your brain, you can follow along with this. Um, and I'm going to discuss with you a little bit on my options, my budgets, plural, um, the reasons that I'm looking at different things, and the reason for the decisions that I'm making. And hopefully, this stuff will also help you if you're interested in doing something similar yourself. Okay. So if you're thinking about building a wall, then something in this thought process in my crazy brain may actually apply to you and help you make a decision on what direction you want to go. The first thing I have to consider is what you want out of the system. Because what you want is going to dictate what direction you go in a lot of ways. For example, some people might want a high SPL wall, maximum amount of sound pressure for the meter. Some people may want a very, very musical stunt wall kind of wall inside your vehicle, like my flat wall that I'm running right now. The ported flat wall's got a great sonic quality. It's got a long range, still gets really loud. It doesn't make quite as much wind, and it isn't quite as good on the meter, but it's got range, so it plays everything. But me, some of you guys may be along in my boat. What I want is a wall that plays really low. We're talking down in the low 20s and lower. I really want to focus on, say, maybe 18 hertz up to mid 40s, something like that. That's what I'm looking for. And I also want it to be windy. So I want the really good lows, real low lows, and lots of air movement. Those are the things that I want. Now, if I can manage to get a decent amount of sound pressure out of it at the same time, fine. But that is the third thing down on the list. Okay. Um, I'm hoping to be maybe in the mid to high 50s. If I can manage to jump into a 60 or be right there at a 60, that'd be awesome. But I'm not trying, that's not my main goal. So, knowing what you want is a good place to start. You can't design something if you don't know which one you want. Now, I have access to the equipment that I need. All right, so that's not part of this scenario. You may already have some subwoofers, amplifiers, the whole setup. You're just trying to figure out how to build it. Or you may be going, well, I'm going to figure out what I want to build, and then I'm going to buy the equipment. Okay. And that's a really good way of going at it. Me personally, I'm working with a specific brand. So I build inside that brand's wheelhouse. So what I'm building, I'm going to build to spec for the equipment that I have. Make sense? In your case, you may um, buy equipment to fit in the specs that you have open to you. So you have a little more flexibility. So one budget I have is the equipment available. Okay, that's a budget. Although that's not part of my money budget, really. It is, but it ain't. But it is a part. It is a budget. I have to work inside this bubble. Okay, which means I'm going to be running Slapz Oblivions, 15s. The second budget I have is the space that I'm working with inside of my Tahoe. Now, when you're building a wall, you've got a few things to consider. And we're only going to cover some basic walls. We're not going to get into the really, really bunker stuff because I don't know anything about a lot of that advanced stuff. I know that it exists, but I don't know anything about it. So you've got, in the wall category, you've got a C-pillar wall, which is back behind the second row. You got the B-pillar wall, which is right behind the first row, so right behind the driver and passenger seat. And so you can figure out which one of those you want to do. I'm going to be building a B-pillar wall with an extension to push it back just a little bit so I have room for the seats to lay down. Then you've got, of the wall categories, of those two, B-pillar or C-pillar, you've got fourth order wall, which is a closed-in sealed bottom chamber, and then the subs mounted in the top of that, playing into a cavity above through a port. Usually the port is forward. So think of it as a large sealed box with subs mounted on the top of it and then a roof over it, like a hood. Okay. That would be a fourth. You could put that in either the C pillar or the B pillar position. And then you've got the sixth order, which is a series, specifically a series sixth order. It's the same setup, except the bottom chamber is ported into that top hood, okay? And that would mount in either the C pillar or the B pillar chamber. Now for me, and then you have the ported flat wall, which is essentially like a ported box with the subs and the port in the front, and then you just seal it off to the sides like the B pillar or the C pillar, which is what my last two builds have been, is ported flat walls. Those are the three basic things that you're going to want to pick from, one of those. Now, on the fourth orders, you can also do crazy fourth orders where you've got a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of airspace, just enough to get the subwoofer inside of it, like a tube that's just deep enough for the sub to actually fit in and screw down, and then a huge giant second chamber. So you got this tiny little sealed chamber, then a big giant room of a second chamber, and then a loading wall with a hole, and that creates your fourth. That's a high ratio of fourth. That's going to be good for making a tremendous amount of SPL at one note. And it's not going to do anything else at all. It's just a one note, usually fairly high tuned, one note wonder, strictly for the meter. That's a top fuel dragster. It's a laser. It does a one thing. That's not what I want. But if you're looking for high end SPL, like extreme SPL, that's the one. That's where you're going to get it at. You're going to get into those mid and high 60s. But like I said, it's done. That's all it does. It's not my style, but to each their own. Then you've also got ported flat walls where you have a big, huge driver's side port. It'll be big enough that you can walk into it if you bend over, like crunch down and walk in. Big, huge port. Those are really, really loud too. And they're more musical than that high ratio of fourth order. Although everything is more musical than a high ratio of fourth order, but they are quite musical. So that's always an option. The downside to those is you're limited to the baffle space. So it kind of depends on how much space you have for that speaker baffle. If you can create enough baffle space to put your subs in there, and do a large walk-in port, um, flat wall, a driver's side port flat wall, then that's great. But some guys don't have that much floor to ceiling, side to side room to be able to incorporate that. And it's not going to be as windy. So, and don't get me wrong, it will blow, but it's going to take a whole lot more power and a whole lot more of everything to get it to work. So, it's not my style. What I'm looking for is a Series 6. So that gives me an idea which direction to go. Now let's talk about those budgets. I have a time budget. My time budget is quite large. I have months to do this, and I have all the time I want to put into it every day to work on it. So that's where I have the biggest budget. Is my time. My physical ability budget is very small because my heart condition and other things that slow me down and make it hard for me to do very much physical stuff at all for any length of time. So I have a very small physical budget. But that works well with the time budget because I can take all the time I need to do it and I don't have to do a whole lot very quickly. So that works good together. Those two budgets jam, right? Uh, Money wise, I've got a reasonable money budget. It's not great. It's not even really what I would call good, but it's okay. I have an income of money coming in, and I can invest as much of it as I need to get it done. Still fairly tight though. So what I'll be using most likely is some of the least expensive, but still decent plywood I can get a hold of. Now, having all that considered, I've also got a skill budget. I'm no cabinet maker. You know what I mean? I'm not that cabinet grade trim guy. I'm more of a framing carpenter level uh, builder. Actually, I shouldn't even call myself that level. I was a sheetrocker primarily, so we had to do some framing. But yeah, I mean, I measure everything in quarter of an inch, if you know what I'm saying. Uh, I can get it done though. So these are different budgets that you have to consider. Now, if you have zero skill uh, and or zero physical ability, then you need to have more money because you're going to have to pay somebody else for their skill, and their physical ability. Um, there's all of these things are going to go up and down. There's going to be adjustments to be made. So it's all something to consider. Now, what's left? Well, now I'm up to deciding some things because there's two different ways to build all of these enclosures and these walls in these vehicles. One method is what we call a build-in, and that's where you strip all of the trim out, all the plastic, all the carpet, everything that's not metal comes out. From the back of the driver's and passenger seat back, everything gets stripped down to metal and glass and rubber seals. And that's it. Then you go back in with glue and different methods to layer in wood into those sides and build that back in to where you have a nice flat, solid surface that's attached to the outside of the vehicle, a really thick, heavy duty shell. You do the floor and the ceiling and the sides, and you bring them all in until you get a cube inside there. You end up with the wood meeting in a square or a rectangle on each wall, ceiling, and floor, and you've got corners and all, right? A tunnel. From that point on, you can turn that tunnel into any of those enclosures. Now, of course, the tunnel would stop if you were doing a C-pillar build, that tunnel would stop at the back of the second row. If you're doing a B-pillar build, then that tunnel stops at the back of the front row. So it depends on where you're going, but it's still the same tunnel. Now, once you do that, then you can build in the insert part of that and the back and the front to create the enclosure type that you're looking for. But you're going to need to get that done just to figure out how much airspace you have and where you're going to have to put baffles at and where you're going to need ports at, all that kind of stuff. Now, for me, I was going to say there's two different types of ways to do this. That's one. The other one is what we call a slide in. That's where you build the enclosure as pretty much as big as you can get it and still push it through the back of the vehicle. In the SUV, it's only going to work really in something that has a big hatch. So you build the enclosure outside of the vehicle, and you build it to the same size, the maximum size that can fit through the opening of the vehicle and slide into the interior. And then you just connect it to the B pillar or the C pillar to seal it off. That we call a slide in. A slide in uses less material generally, is easier to build, less physical work, less strength to build because you're going to build it on a table instead of trying to build it inside the vehicle piece by piece. But it also requires some serious muscle to shove that sucker in there. And it's not as efficient on airspace inside the vehicle. So whenever you're building it in, when you're building one into the vehicle, you're going to be able to maximize all of that space inside there because you're going to create structure that fits up in those little nooks and crannies. And you get all that rigid, solid structure, and you don't leave any extra space on the table. You'll be able to get more speakers in and properly sized enclosure to handle those. Whereas with a slide in, you're building it to fit through the opening, but there's going to be huge cavities around it that are going to be left over space that's not being used for subwoofers and for air, for the box itself. So it's not as efficient, but you get to do almost all the work on a table instead of climbing in and out of a vehicle on your hands and knees. So once you understand which type of wall you want to build and where you want it, C pillar or B pillar, then you decide whether you want to do a build in or a slide in. And once you've made those decisions, now you can figure out which of those you're going to build because you're going to want to know all those things before you get to that last part. In my case, I'm staring at probably a sixth order, which is the bottom chamber with a port that ports up into the top chamber, subs mounted on top of the bottom chamber. The decision that I have to make at this point, though, is whether I'm going to use 415s or 615s. 415s are going to allow me to have more airspace in that bottom chamber. And you're going to need to use the airspace that you would basically, however many subs you're using. You say one sub requires 3 cubic feet or whatever, 3.25 cubic feet of airspace and this much port tuned to this frequency, right? Well, you basically multiply that times 6. So you're basically you're designing 6 of those combined together. It's not a perfect analogy, but it kind of gives you the idea. So however many of those you need, you multiply that 3.25 times the subs. And that's your bottom chamber. And then your top chamber needs to be a specific ratio of the bottom chamber. A 1-to-1, meaning however much space there is in the bottom chamber is also in the top chamber. That's a 1-to-1. is usually really musical, but it's not really loud. Something like a 3-to-1 means that you've got 3 times as much space in the top as you do in the bottom, and that's going to be really really loud with a very very narrow band. Okay, really really narrow band, so it's going to have a small space that it's going to play, but it's going to really get down. More common for a general demo build is usually between a 1-to-1 and like a 1 to 1.2 or 1.3. So a little bit more room in the top than there is in the bottom, essentially. And so you have to figure that out because that's going to dictate how much space you have left in the bottom chamber, which is going to dictate how many subs you can put in there. You see how this works? So if you're doing 4 subs at 3.25 cubic feet, that's see, 12, 13, 14, 13 cubic feet of airspace that you need down there after you take away the port and the thickness of the wood and the bracing, all that stuff. And then if you figure out how much room you have to work with on the, and then you subtract the wood, the bracing, and all that stuff, and it gives you that amount of airspace, then you can figure out, well, what my sub needs is this much airspace. Well, I don't have enough room for that sub. Well, maybe there's another sub that doesn't require as much airspace. You could use that one instead. Hey, now you can all of a sudden get that many in there. That's why I said you want to start with all this other stuff and then work your way down to the very last part of figuring out what kind of box specifically and how many subs. When you get to that point, then you're going to be working with your subs, the actual subwoofers and the design to figure out what's going to fit in that last part. Now, if you've already got the subs, then you're kind of forced into a certain box. You don't have as many options to change it around unless you just happen to have subs that are perfect for the idea that you've got. Now, I'm studying on the 6th order. My options are honestly this. There's 4 of them. Not doing anything and just rebuilding what I've got and reinforcing it, that's one option. Not my favorite option, but it's one. Another option is running 6 subs in a 4th order, like a 1 to 1.5, something like that ratio, 4th order. Now, the benefits of a 4th order is a whole lot easier to get something that works pretty good. It's not terribly hard to design or build. Also, it takes up less space than a 6 because you don't have to worry about that back port and fitting that into the whole thing. So you can use less of that chamber, or you can use more of that bottom chamber for actual airspace and less of it for other stuff. The disadvantage is you only get really one tuning function, but the plus side of that is that tuning function is that front port up there out behind your head, and that's fairly easy to redo if you need to. So it's got its goods and bads. Also tends to get a little warmer. It tends to load weird on the back subs. Sometimes it can get a little hot. Lots of little things, but it's not going to play well. I won't say that because they can, but the 6th order kind of kills a lot of those problems, but it takes up more space because you have to add the port and all the material for the port, and that changes things. The plus side of the 6 is you get a wider range of potential output, and I believe you get more wind as well. Now, that could be wrong about that because I've seen some really, really, really windy fourth order builds. But I think the wind on the 6 is going to be better given the same equipment. So I have to decide whether I'm going to do a sixth order and 4 subs or 6 subs. That's my really big decision that I have to come up with. That's where I'm at. And I haven't decided, but I hope this little discussion may have helped you see some different ideas and pick out some different ideas to figure out how you want to proceed forward with your wall. And, nobody can decide for you, but there's plenty of people out there that can help you design enclosures and give you a tuning idea. One of which I'll have linked down here in the bottom. I have a box designer that I work with, and I think you'll find him very helpful. If you're looking for a subwoofer enclosure design, even a regular one or something crazy like we're talking about, any kind of enclosure design, down there in the links below, you'll see it. Sub enclosure design. Click on that. That's my buddy. He does good work. And if you have any suggestions on what you think I could do with either 4 or 6 Oblivion 15s, Slapz Audio, put those comments down below. I want to hear about them. I want to throw some stuff at me, man. Hit me. I got that's what subs I have. I got plenty of power for them. What would be your choice of things? And now, of course, it's going to be a B-pillar flat wall or B-pillar wall of some sort. And if you're looking for good, solid audio equipment and you want to work on a budget, Slapz Audio down below. Use discount code CAE to get 10% off. And if you want a good, solid battery, Trunk Thunder Lithium, also down below, discount code CAE10. If you're shopping for B2 audio, you got the money to spend on it, and you want some really crazy stuff, or if you want anything from Big Jeff Audio, which pretty much covers the entirety of the audio spectrum, you can use discount code CAE at Big Jeff or B2 to get savings there. And I appreciate you guys for stopping in and hanging out with me as I talk about my crazy ideas. But be sure and let me know what you think down below and what kind of crazy ideas you got. Peace, guys.